We already talked a bit about the Grant Morrison Batman run with the first video I made on this series a few months back, though this is the part that really inspired me to make this video, since here we'll be looking at the Batman and Robin portion of the run, which was the first series I actively collected in my comic collecting journey back in the day, with me before this mostly buying trade paperbacks and random back issues since I was a kid and I just went by what cover was cool. Honestly, this is the run I've read the most in my days. I've probably read the Morrison Batman and Robin run at least 6 or 7 times. It's just an utter classic. For this book, Grant Morrison decided to cycle through artists a bit, with each story arc featuring interiors by a different artist, many of whom didn't work on the normal stable of DC artists at the time. Much of this gives it a pretty unique style. It also feels and looks very British from a comic design perspective, and what I mean by that is the British style of comic book art, which is often made more experimental in nature than the more faux realistic style of the United States comic book. This book was also notable for featuring a new Batman with Dick Grayson, who was the original Robin and later Nightwing, filling in the cowl following the seeming death of Bruce Wayne during Final Crisis, and Damian Wayne, his son, as the new Robin. This kind of flips the dark Batman light Robin dynamic that we've traditionally had on its head, with Batman playing good cop and Robin being the more unhinged side of the spectrum. Batman and Robin issues 1 through 3 are part of the first story arc in this run, Batman Reborn, which sees Morrison backed up by comic book artist Frank Quitely, who has been a frequent collaborator of Morrison's for many years, back to his X-Men days with Marvel in the early 2000s. Though he's also known for doing All-Star Superman with Morrison, most famously. The new Batman and Robin fly in on their Batmobile, which literally flies, with a new gang in town, the Circus of Crime, with the duo running into the Toad first, who eventually dies as we learn the real threat from this gang is Professor Pig and his gang of dolls. Anyhow, Dick Grayson is kind of doubting himself as Batman, but following Damian's capture by Pig's Dolltrons, Dick has to man the cowl and make it his own. Pig is ready to assimilate Damian to his cult when Batman comes crashing in and stops Pig, though one of the surviving Dolltrons starts a partnership with the Red Hood, with a new Batman and Robin officially making waves in the city of Gotham. This comic sees a number of first appearances. First off, you have Dick back as Batman for a semi-long-term run as the titular character, though as we know, he had dabbled in the cowl a few times before in the past. The Circus of Crime features Big Top, who is a one-off obese man who gets maimed by Robin during his battle with him. He since appeared in the new Prime Universe timeline, but hasn't really been super relevant. Siam is a 3-pronged villain who is 3 people in one. These guys never made any sort of big splash in the DC universe. Mr. Toad is the first bad guy they encounter. He dies in this series, but the new character actually had some staying power, appearing most recently in a new Beast Boy series on HBO Max that spun off from Teen Titans Go, so he's appeared here and there since then. Phosphorus Rex is also pretty obscure, but showed up a few times in the modern timeline. Finally, you have Professor Pig, who is the big creation of this arc, appearing a ton in the Prime Earth comics, as well as a handful of times, even following this arc in the New Earth timeline. And with good reason. He's an interesting character, and an interesting looking character as well. His Dolltron minions are also very interesting looking, and show how sadistic the character is. The main Dolltron, Sasha, starts as a Dolltron minion, but eventually goes out for revenge on Professor Pig and crime in general, and becomes the villainous sidekick of Jason Todd moving into the next story arc in this series. She has more or less fallen into obscurity, but I really liked this character. I think the big problem is following the Prime Earth reboot, it hasn't really been easy to find a place for her, especially with her ambiguous fate in the comic, as we'll talk about, and Red Hood more or less becoming an anti-hero rather than a straight villain, or a anti-villain, I guess. He's kind of leans towards the villainous side in the pre-New 52 timeline, but goes a little more good and starts interacting with the Bat family more as we move into the modern timeline. This is a good opening arc. Pig is amazing, and I liked the switched Batman and Robin dynamic, Batman light, Robin dark, along with a Gotham that stays as sadistic as ever, as we see with Pig and the Circus of Crime. Dick is a great Nightwing and Robin, but seeing him struggle to fit Batman's boots is kind of incredible and very interesting. Frank Quitely's art is quite frankly amazing and gives a really strong look to the book that also has the grit you'd expect from a Batman story of this nature. Batman and Robin, issues 4 through 6, Revenge of the Red Hood, is illustrated by Philip Tan, though Frank Quitely stayed on for covers for this arc. Damian reveals himself to Gotham as the heir to the seemingly missing Bruce Wayne's legacy, with a new character in Gotham running around, Auburn Sexton, who's kind of some sort of British detective. Meanwhile, Red Hood is back in Gotham and has his own sidekick Scarlet, the two running amok and doing what you may suspect, killing villains, with Red Hood capitalizing on social media to gain favor, despite their murdering antics, though in Gotham that kind of starts selling. Batman and Robin finally fight Red Hood and Scarlet, saving Penguin from sharing the fate of many of their victims previously, as Gothamites are polling that they would largely approve of what Red Hood's doing over Batman, thinking people need to be a little harder on crime, especially with, your Jokers running around. After their first skirmish, Batman and Robin eventually find the duo, attempting to finish their work on a hospitalized survivor of an attack of theirs. Anyhow, while this happens, a seemingly new villain comes to town, the Flamingo, who is basically so injured he became a psycho cannibal. Red Hood, Scarlet, Batman, and Robin fight the Flamingo, with Robin being paralyzed in the process. The Flamingo eventually being defeated by the Red Hood, though Red Hood is arrested. Batman feels defeated by what happened, but Talia al Ghul, who's been keeping tabs on her son Damian, prepares to collect the boy. Dick says fuck it and finds the corpse of Batman, who he plans to resurrect in a Lazarus pit since he doesn't think he can do the Batman stuff anymore. Pink Flamingo first appeared here, and I like his look. It's cool enough that it has given him a little staying power, with him showing up a few times in the modern DC Prime universe more recently, and also showing up in both the Gotham and Batwoman TV shows in live action. I like this arc. Anytime Red Hood shows up, especially back in the time when he was more of an occasional antagonist, it's always fun. And having Scarlet as his sidekick, with Batman and Robin having a real rivalry in the public relations field, is kind of interesting. It is a cool take on how nihilistic society was in 2009, and I guess it really extends to today. I think something like this could have been made today and have really not needed to be changed much. It's slightly ahead of its time. Batman and Robin 7 through 9, Blackest Night, ironically came out around the same time as the comic book event Blackest Night, though is unrelated. See, this is a play on words, Blackest Night with a K, like Batman instead of night, like the time of day. Anyhow, Cameron Stewart took over for art on this one, and it's pretty akin to what Frank Quitely did in the first arc, aiming for a more grimy style than what Philip Tan did in the previous arc. Batman teams up with Night Squire and Batwoman, trying to resurrect Batman, taking what they believe to be Batman's body to London, to the last location of one of Ra's al Ghul's Lazarus pits. They're starting to go extinct around this time. The heroes await Bruce's return, but something obviously went wrong, since this so-called Batman comes after the heroes, more crazed than your normal Lazarus Pit resurrection. Turns out this Batman was a clone created during Final Crisis by the forces of Apocalypse. If you saw my last video on the Grant Morrison arc, you'll see that the forces of Apocalypse started making a bunch of fake Batman clones, and this is kind of the payoff to that. This fake Batman makes it off and eventually locates Damian, who is still recovering from his temporary paralysis of the last arc. Before the fake Batman can kill Damian, though, Batwoman and Batman show up to save him. Eventually, the fake Batman is defeated and falls apart, with Dick feeling a bit guilty that he tried reviving Bruce in this moment of desperation, but realizing that Tim Drake, who has been searching for Bruce Wayne, was right, and that Bruce Wayne must be alive somewhere. I like this comic. Knight and Squire, as we covered in our last video, were some old school deep takes brought back and more or less owned by Grant Morrison from here, and they're awesome. I also cautiously like Batwoman. She was a Silver Age deep cut. Basically, she was made to prove Batman wasn't gay back in the 1950s, even having her own Batgirl as her pseudo-Robin, though as the line transitioned into the 60s, the character was more or less phased out and forgotten and replaced with Barbara Gordon. Then down the line would pop back up. She's cool in this, but I have read some garbage they put out about her too, so I don't know. I'm always mixed on her. This was really an era of zombies for DC, as was just culture in general. There was a lot of zombies hanging around, with the main Blackest Night series happening at this time as well. Though this wasn't a tie-in to that. In fact, Batman is a fairly minor character in that book, though he does have a tie-in series because it's Batman, so naturally they made one. Perhaps I'll do Blackest Night after this. I kind of was reading this feeling a bit nostalgic. I like this arc. I think it sets up the pretty interesting return of Bruce Wayne stuff that comes up as we go through this line, though I will admit it all kind of felt fast, like Batman had not been dead very long during this build-up, but that's how comics go. Plus, with the looming New 52 relaunch, Dick's time as Batman was already nearing its end, as it literally just began a couple arcs earlier. Okay, so between arcs, Grant Morrison went back to guest write Batman 700, which shows a glimpse of Batman through the years, more or less. Batman and Robin, Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson in the past encounter a group of their villains who have a machine that can allow time travel. After saving the day, they debate whether or not to use it for their gain, but decide against it. Next, we see Batman and Robin, Dick Grayson and Damian this time, find the body of the professor who created the device, Professor Carter Nicholas, though Dick thinks it's odd the professor was in his 80s when he would think he should be closer to his 60s. Next, we see Damian Wayne as Batman in the future, encountering the Professor and investigating his death while saving the city from a second Two-Face. And finally, we get a glimpse at the future where we see Terry McGinnis as Batman being mentored by Damian on how to be Batman, and how it all ties back into Professor Carter Nicholas and his kind of conspiracy. This was a fun issue. It was cool, especially at that time, to see the Batmen of various eras doing their thing, especially since Dick just took over Batman's legacy, and it was an anniversary issue with legacy kind of a big theme in the Batman line at that time. I like the idea of Terry McGinnis being mentored by Damian rather than Bruce as he was in the DC animated universe. Honestly, it's just kind of a fun thing showing the endless need for Batman in the DC universe and kind of what could potentially happen in the future before everything got retconned in the New 52, but whatever, good stuff. Batman and Robin issues 10 through 12 feature interior art by Andy Clark, who does a pretty solid job. Damian is taking a hands-on role in Wayne Enterprises, suspicious about where some of the finances are going, as Dick talks with the mysterious Oberon Suxton, who is looking for a mysterious killer, knocking off the rich men and women who are linked to the Black Glove organization, which we talked about ad nauseum in my last Grant Morrison Batman video. With Alfred looking through Wayne Manor for clues, since over in the Red Robin book, Tim Drake was theorizing that Bruce was sent back in time due to the Omega effect. This ties into the Return of Bruce Wayne book, which ran concurrent to this, but it's going to be really confusing chopping those in, so we'll come back to that entire book after we talk about these two arcs of Batman and Robin. Batman and Robin join in on the search and eventually find some evidence, but Robin starts having his body controlled and is trying to assassinate Batman, a plan organized by his mother. Robin meets up with Oberon Sexton, but the duo is cornered by random assassins trying to kill Sexton. After that ordeal, we learn Talia has hooked up a Neuralink to Damian that Deathstroke is controlling, forcing him to fight Dick Grayson. Anyhow, the duo fight a bit, with Deathstroke attempting to gloat, but that overloads the connection. The battle ending with Batman shocking Robin and knocking down Deathstroke's connection. We learn that Talia had done this when she fixed Damian's spine a few issues back, and that she's doing this since she thinks her son is being indoctrinated by the Batmen. Anyhow, Batman finds Suxton suspicious and confronts him, only to find out he was the Joker all along, just as Simon Hurt returns to Gotham to exact his revenge on Batman and take over the city from the events of the previous Grant Morrison run. Damian's clone, known as Heretic, first appears in this arc. He would go on to be an important part of Damian's story arc in the Morrison years, with Talia creating this clone as a superior, at least by her desires, clone of her son, one that wasn't corrupted by the Bat family. He's foreshadowed here, but not all that important at this point. This was a pretty good book, though much like a lot of hero versus hero books, you have the convoluted reason at its core for the heroes to kind of fight and also get the kind of cop-out at the end that says they aren't actually feuding. It's just like mind control, bro. I will say calling this Batman vs. Robin is a bit of bait, since this book is much more about the duo unraveling some ongoing mysteries and connecting it to the first part of Morrison's Batman run, while foreshadowing the future with Heretic and a couple other plot points. Dick Grayson still has beef with Deathstroke, not only for menacing the Titans for decades, but also fairly recently at the time of this book. Deathstroke destroyed Bloodhaven during Infinite Crisis, which still gets to Dick, and is only an added irritant to the fact that Bro commandeered his sidekick's body. It also heavily ties into the return of Bruce Wayne, which kind of occurs concurrently. It's confusing in that series, honestly. Grant Morrison teams up with Tony Daniel for Batman 701 and 702, the follow-up to Batman R.I.P. and Final Crisis that explains how and why Bruce Wayne is stuck in time, while also tying directly into the return of Bruce Wayne. These comics are really good, showing how Batman wasn't actually vaporized by Darkseid's lasers, and later he was pulled back in time. It does a good job filling in the gaps that were left by Final Crisis. It's mostly just lore, so I don't have a ton to add to this, but Tony Daniel does an amazing job on art, as he always does. He was definitely my favorite Batman artist of the era. It's dynamic yet real, which was kind of the style of the era, and Tony Daniel just did it the best, I think, at that time for Batman. I think there would be a bit of a shift we would see when Greg Capullo took over in 2011, but we'll probably talk more about that another time. Batman and Robin 13 through 15, Batman and Robin Must Die, is the last arc of Grant Morrison's Batman and Robin's segment of his run, issue 16 being an epilogue we'll look back at after the return of Bruce Wayne, but give us a second here. Anyhow, the art was done by Fraser Irving, and look, I don't hate this art, but I don't think this is the book for it, especially since the first dozen issues all had an art of a fairly similar style, so this is a bit surreal and odd to me. The backgrounds feel more impressionistic, and the coloring is a little odd to me. I think this would fit better with a character like Sandman or something rather than Batman and Robin, or at the very least, it is jarring when compared to the rest of the series. Simon Hurd is back, pretending to be Thomas Wayne, taking over Wayne Manor after his humiliating defeat during the events of Batman R.I.P., with him shooting Batman in the head. Anyhow, the story jumps back a few days, and Robin is interrogating Joker following his capture in the last arc after pretending to be Oberon Sexton for a while. Joker asks to speak to Robin and taunts him, though Damian has no qualms in beating the Joker with a crowbar and reversing the punishment Joker did to Jason Todd during the death in the family years earlier. Meanwhile, Batman, on his way to stop Robin from doing anything too crazy, is attacked by Daltrons following Professor Pig's escape from Blackgate, assisted by the El Penalty cartel. Joker manages to poison Robin with Joker venom and takes Robin hostage, while Gordon is kidnapped and the Batmobile blows up, with Batman being knocked unconscious, eventually coming to find out Joker and Robin are after Simon Hurt. Anyhow, everyone kind of meets up, and after some scuffling, we get back to the start of the comic, where Dick is shot in the head by Dr. Hurt, who tells him he'll have 12 hours to live based on how he was shot. Batman and Robin, however, know something Hurt doesn't, and all of a sudden, Bruce Wayne's Batman shows up and stops Hurt. Okay, so that sounded a bit out of the blue, so we'll need to circle back into the return of Bruce Wayne quick, and then we'll talk about the epilogue. This group of books wraps up the Dr. Hurt arc, which I will admit feels a bit abridged when compared to the threat he was in Batman R.I.P., and Batman's appearance would be really random to people who didn't also read the Return of Bruce Wayne comic arc. That said, when in tandem, those two books converge to show the return of Bruce Wayne, with the original Batman coming in clutch to save the new Batman and Robin. This also kind of leads into issue 16, which will bring us to the final chapter of this run. I like this book. I especially like the Robin-Joker dynamic. I found that to be particularly interesting, and it's sort of a rite of passage for Robins, who have all had an interesting dynamic with the Joker, especially since the villain murdered one of the predecessors, Jason Todd. I think Tim Drake also had the Joker miniseries from the 90s, and you always kind of have this interesting dynamic seeing how they react with Joker, someone who kind of proved to be especially deadly to people in that role. Batman The Return of Bruce Wayne is a time-traveling adventure featuring covers by Andy Kubert with interiors done by different artists each issue, with Chris Sprouse on issue 1, Fraser Irving on issue 2, Yannick Paquette on issue 3, Georges Genety on issue 4, Ryan Sook and Pierre Perez on issue 5, and Lee Garbett and Pierre Perez again on issue 6. The story takes Bruce through his family history, starting thousands of years ago in the early days of what would become Gotham, with a guest appearance from Vandal Savage, who is recurring in this book, then known as Chief Savage, with Bruce gaining the moniker Man of Bats before being transported to 1640, where he comes to blows with his ancestor Nathaniel Wayne, who is a witch hunter in a Salem kind of way. Meanwhile, we see Superman, Hal Jordan, Booster Gold, and Rip Hunter following Batman through time, determining that the mind-wiped Wayne would make his way back through time, then spring a trap Darkseid put within him, making a super weapon of himself. Bruce made a friend, Annie, as he's attacked by a beast who later returns, distracting Bruce while Annie is hanged, with her putting a curse on the Wayne bloodline after Nathaniel Wayne betrayed her, and Bruce being brought forward again to the 1700s, where he runs into Vandal Savage, the Immortal again. This time, though, he is a pirate known as Blackbeard, and after some skirmishes, while the Justice League and Bat family search for clues and prepare for the potential disaster that Superman and his team believe is coming, Bruce pops forward to the 1800s and teams up with Jonah Hex, which eventually leads to the construction of Wayne Manor by Alan Wayne before jumping ahead again. This time we see Bruce hired by a mysterious woman and fitted with Thomas Wayne's batsuit. Eventually realizing something weird is happening, he tracks the lady who hired him and ends up at a graveyard where the Black Glove attempts to trap him. Bruce fights off the Black Glove, then eventually makes it back to the present day. Due to Darkseid's trap, though, Bruce is given absolute knowledge and needs his mind wiped, or it will mean the end of the world. Batman appears on the Justice League Watchtower and is an evil cyborg man. He's beating the shit out of everyone, but is finally removed from his cyborg antimatter stuff, though through the process he dies for real. But then they resuscitate him, and we cut back to the events of Batman and Robin issue 15 with him ambushing Dr. Hurt. I'm mixed on this comic. There's a lot of good stuff here, but there's also so much stuff in it. It kind of ends up getting a little convoluted, and if you don't have a solid knowledge of Morrison's Batman run, Batman in general, DC history fairly thoroughly, and Final Crisis, it ends up being very confusing. I find Bruce's time travel antics really entertaining, basically a way to ass pull what may have been an Elseworld comic into the main Bruce Wayne's life story, I guess. And on the other hand, this pays off as an epilogue to Final Crisis and Dick's time as the replacement Batman. I like that the superheroes are all doing their best to save Batman while simultaneously trying to make sure the world isn't blown up upon his return either. The Superman, Green Lantern, Rip Hunter, Booster Gold team-up is interesting. You don't see Rip Hunter much these days, so that's always fun. Going to the Old West meant a small story with Jonah Hex, and I always love him. He's a classic DC Western character and my favorite Western character. Western like Old West, you know. Honestly, I kind of hate how death is handled in comics since it's literally never permanent. I mean, Marvel apparently just brought back Gwen Stacy. There was a saying back in the day in comics. It was kind of a rule of thumb that the only people who would for sure stay dead in comics was Uncle Ben, Gwen Stacy, Bucky, and Jason Todd. Well, they haven't brought back Uncle Ben yet, but I'm sure they will eventually. We knew Bruce would come back, but it just felt too short. Although, as we will cover in part 3 of our Morrison retrospective, they at least had an interesting angle to take Bruce moving forward. Issue 16 of Batman and Robin Black Mass follows Bruce Wayne back from the dead across from the new Batman, Dick Grayson, and Damian Wayne, his son, and the new Robin. Bruce Wayne confronts Dr. Hurt after making his dramatic entrance in the prior issue. The two battle for a second, ending up in the Batcave, where Batman finally bests Hurt, only for the villain to run off, running into the Joker and being buried alive in the process. Meanwhile, Dick is being treated for being shot in the head, and Robin deactivates a nuclear device Joker planted, because, you know, it's Joker. He had to do something like that. The issue ends on Damian wondering what's next with Batman and Robin, and Bruce Wayne holding a press conference revealing that he's going to put his large fortune behind Batman and start a global force known as Batman Incorporated. This comic is fun. Bruce literally traveled back through time to finally get his hands on Dr. Hurt for all the bullshit the guy put him through the last few years. See both this run and, of course, the first part of Morrison's run. Plus, the issue sets up Batman Incorporated, which would be pretty much the most important aspect of the final chapter of Grant Morrison's Batman run going forward. This was good. It's mostly just Batman kicking ass for a few pages, and I enjoyed it. Overall, I love this part of the run. Dick Grayson, in many ways, is the best and worst successor for Batman, which is exactly what he learns throughout this run. He's so different from Batman, but like Batman, he's skilled at a bit of everything. I think he's perfectly paired with Damian Wayne as Robin in a lot of ways. I don't think one would have worked without the other, at least at this point. If Dick was paired with Tim Drake or another lighthearted and optimistic Robin, I don't think that the dynamic would have been right. This makes Dick basically relive his dynamic with Bruce, but rather than being the student, he's now the teacher. I don't know, it's kind of a fun concept. Also, the costumes are really cool, along with the new villain, Professor Pig, specifically being one of my favorites, and could we please get this guy in the Matt Reeves Batman universe? Anyhow, next we'll be shifting gears back to the reincarnated Bruce Wayne and his attempts to start a worldwide crime-fighting franchise, Batman Incorporated. I am also excited for that video, because it's pretty much just the series Batman Incorporated Volume 1. And 2 we're looking at. Nothing crazy like a mini-series and other random guest spots on different books that count into his run. And whatever I was forced to do with these first 2 parts, it's just read straight through the series, no jumping around. We're just going through it. Though in that video I'll need to talk about the New 52 and how that kind of sort of fucked everything up, but also not really that much. There's no way that any of these videos couldn't not be a little bit confusing, so sorry in advance.